Hello, everybody. Welcome to Hodgepod. Another great episode coming up today. I have an author, and he's come out with his first thriller novel. Eric Magun has been kind enough to join me. He has a great book. It's called Thank God for the Sinners. It's won two major awards in 2025. It came out published on May 31st of this year. And it's about Rick Price, a double agent. But I'm going to have Eric talk about that. And Eric, welcome to Hodgepod. I'm looking forward to talking to you today. Thank you.
No, thank you for having me.
If you could introduce yourself to my audience.
Yeah, hi. I have been I've started out my career writing screenplays. I made a feature film back in 1996, actually. Won a bunch of nice independent awards for that, and then continued on the writing process. And at some point in my life took a little bit of a curveball, as it does with most people, and I entered the corporate professional world and found myself living overseas in Asia, China and Southeast Asia for about 25, almost 30 years, living and working. And amongst my travels and amongst my storytelling, I just had a world of different ideas coming through my head of trying to figure out how I can get those amazing inspirations and things that I saw and the people that I've met and the places I've been and get them out on paper and try to put it together in a real compelling story.
That's interesting. Yeah, we get a lot of curveballs in life. It's how you react after the curveball, gets curved. So, what was it like living overseas versus in the United States?
Yeah, it was interesting. I wanted an interesting time that I write about in my book. And, I was in China for about the early 90s, almost right after it opened up for American businessmen to go. So, I was one of the early pioneers over there. I was young, I was dumb, I was just out of college. And I thought, wow, this is going to be an amazing experience. And it was an amazing experience. But at that time, it was also incredibly, incredibly difficult. You're talking about a country that's definitely unrecognizable to the way that it was today. Mm. Didn't see much foreigners back then, not much, as far as places to stay and places to eat. And, it was a real difficult time, but a real interesting time for a young person who was just trying to, get his life started. As a matter of fact, there were some instances in my life where I walked into some remote cities in China, which they'd never even seen an American before. So,
Wow.
yeah, it was one of those type of situations. Definitely not for the faint of heart, but but very, very interesting.
That's fascinating to live in another country. That must be when you come back to the States, you see different cultures and things like that. I thought that was interesting. So you've come out with your first novel, and it's Thank God for the Sinners. And talk about that, if you would, please. While I was doing my research, there's also a musical playlist, I think, that's attributed to it. And I love music and talking to authors, so this should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and I tried to give so the story itself. It's based on a very sort of, let's just say that the main character is a bit of a sociopath, and he's got trouble making great decisions. He's had a really traumatic and abusive life, and it sort of follows him through his entire livelihood. And within that, he also becomes a clandestine double agent working for China and the US. He's stationed in China. He's also an international businessman as his kind of cover up. So he's got all these sort of hidden lives, right? He's got this married family back in the US. He's overseas presenting himself as an international businessman, but underneath it all, he's trying to obtain secrets for both countries. And even on top of all that, he's riddled with mental illness and trauma and just, again, poor decision making and lots of ghosts and haunting him throughout his life. So it's kind of a maelstrom of emotion, business stress, government stress, espionage, all mixed up into one. And then to sort of up the ante, the character, like if that's not enough, the character, the character also spent his childhood kind of like I did in New York City as a sort of a budgeting hardcore punk rocker, of which when I grew up in New York at that time, that was very much my presence as well. And so he's got sort of this real punk rock kind of agitation and idolation about himself and some of the things that he does. And I wanted to incorporate music into the story as well. All of these incredible bands that shaped my youth into the chapters itself. I kind of got this musical vision in my head. So I'm writing this tumultuous, incredible chapter. I'm singing along with a song that is expressing what this chapter means to the character and to myself. And at the end of it, I really wanted to create sort of this multi-dimensional universe where you can read this incredible story. You can follow along with it on a playlist so that you kind of really understand the emotions behind it as well. And kind of look at it like, kind of like when I was younger, Tommy's the the Who's Tommy actually really affected me. We kind of had this incredible album, this incredible movie, this incredible vision, and it just kind of put it all into one place. I made it really outstanding. And I wanted to do the same thing with the book.
That's interesting. You said the New York punk scene. That must have. I grew up in Boston, so I remember some punk
Okay.
rock bands coming up locally in Boston. But I remember the early '80s. Remember the Clash. I guess Clash. That's one that comes off the top of my head. But yeah, the punk rock band. I listened to some of the playlists before we got on there. And I only knew Iggy Pop and
Yeah.
maybe one other band, but that's quite the list. I gotta have to listen to it. It has some good beat to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot to do with the New York hardcore scene and then hardcore in general. But yeah, Boston and New York, we had those dueling cities every now and then going back and forth. It was quite interesting.
Yeah, I remember some of the local bands that were in the punk rock band Face to Face and Ball and Pivot. Those were some punk rock bands back in the early
Absolutely.
'80s. So I always I'm one of those people. I love listening to streaming music and those bands on the streaming. It brings back memories. So does that do that for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. And it was a lot of fun writing this book and putting myself back into this character that, started as a teenager and involved in the scene. And it just sort of, it spurred all these incredible memories, this incredible unity, this time period where, people had a forum to speak out and they weren't afraid to do so. And they didn't necessarily have to be incredible artists. They had to have a voice and they needed to get it out there, and they had a forum to do so. And it was just an amazing time period. You had a lot of, do it yourself magazines and fanzines and clubs and just a whole association of people that were just out on the outside, but were trying to be heard. So that's a remarkable time period. I tried to encapsulate that a bit in the book here, and then just to kind of shine light on a time period that just went by, but it's still super relevant today.
Yeah, and just getting off topic here, punk rock has definitely made a lot of influence in music that you heard in the '90s, 2000s, and even today. Punk rock has a huge, heavy influence.
Heavy influence, and there's still, I think now, I think much more venues to play punk in. It seems to have a huge following. It has evolved over the years, of course, but it still keeps its dynamic roots. But now there's incredible festivals, punk rock festivals. There's Punk Rock Museum in Las Vegas. I mean, and it has really grown up, and it's nice to see that it grown up.
I remember Devo too from the early '80s. I remember they came up and wore those red things on their head for that song "Whip It," but they had a lot of other good songs. Other than that, they were known for that one song, but they were awesome.
They were awesome, and again, that was just a great byproduct of that era because the era didn't define yourself towards, loud, necessarily loud screaming and violence and, political protests. There were other avenues that said, let's try to be creative. Let's do things that, haven't been done before. And Devo's and Mark Mothersbaugh, who's the head of Devo, is just an icon, and the fact that they're able to invent their own style within this genre, whether it was visually and also through song and prose. Just again, it's just a great creative time.
Yeah, it was. So talk about you've won two great awards for this book already this year. the New York Book Festival for horror, and then also you also won favorite thriller of the New York City Big Book Award. So you've gotten some great awards. Talk about that if you would, please, because and then we'll talk about writing the novel.
Yeah, actually, since you got those notes to today, there's actually now been three
All right.
festival wins. So we're on a roll, man.
The trifecta, the hat trick.
The trifecta. Yeah, so we won the International Impact Awards for Best Book in Psychological Thrillers. I mean, look, it's of course for any author or any artist, it's always great to have some positive feedback. I don't think I went in there, writing a book thinking that, the award ceremony was going to be part of what I was doing. I didn't even know if anybody would even like the book. The book is, it's a tough book. We discussed a lot of things. It's written in a very ferocious way, kind of almost like a punk rock song to itself. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. It's a borderline offensive to some people, but it's also, my growing up, my biggest influence in writing was a guy by the name of Charles Bukowski. And Charles was a writer who wrote real gritty, realistic type of stories. And they weren't for everybody, but the people that, it's kind of like a secret indulgence to people that knew him and loved him, loved everything he wrote. And so, I wanted to write a story that, the character was more of an anti-hero. He's very complex, as you can tell by this interview already. And he's got a lot of things going on, and that not necessarily, the greatest role model, but he struggles with life and he's real and he's got real issues like we all do. And I wanted to put together, something in somebody that, you could relate to, you could understand how he got the way that he got. I give you his whole background from his birth on right up into this incredible situation that happens to him. So you get all the backstory in there as well. So you kind of understand where he is and why he makes some of the decisions he does and how he gets caught up in the life that he does just from his background. And he's a relatable guy, but at the same time, like everybody else, he's not perfect. He's not your average, super counter spy. John Wick can do everything, and he's the anti John Wick. But I wanted to make him relatable, and so that's how that went. And so when I wrote the book, I kind of understood that most people like to read for fantasy, like they like to go to movies for fantasy, and they like to be taken away to places that are uniquely different, but at the same time could be, relatively exciting and or safe. And I said, you know what? I'm going to take you to a place kind of like the places I went to when I was doing my executive career overseas, and they weren't all great. And they were very, very difficult. And there were some very tedious situations and uncompromising situations rather. And we met some people that were not great people. And that's just life, and I wanted to put that all down into a story and give them a character that was just trying to deal with it all and and make it as interesting as I could. So I never really got in there thinking that I was writing the perfect cliche to that sort of great Hollywood hit or that book that would win all, awards and things, because those types of awards
Yeah.
tend to fit into like a very structured narrative where, you have a main character and he's got an issue and he comes to the other side and he's a changed man, you know? And I was like, I just can't do that.
Yeah.
So it's been real interesting to be accepted for writing something a little bit different that doesn't necessarily give you the happiest ending, and be recognized for it. So it's been real nice.
Yeah, life is hard. That's one thing is true. Life is hard. Every day can be, some days can be more of a grind than others. So I definitely understand about your character in the book. I've talked to authors on my podcast on the process of writing, and a lot of the authors use their life experiences or things they've seen or people they know. And you've done this in this book. So I think did it make it easier to write the book when you were the novel when you did it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's always easier to write what you know. I think the difficult part is to, take what you know and then give it a bit of dramatic liberty to make it even, up it to make it a bit more exciting or a bit more unrealistic or a bit more realistic than what it was. And so, yeah, lucky for me, I've had so many different experiences again, living and working overseas and, you know, growing up in the city in the 80s, 70s and 80s. There's just there's so much there going on in the mind. And so it's real important, for me as a person and a writer and an artist to kind of gather all of that and kind of make sense of it all, put it down on paper, give it a good reason, and then make it real exciting. So yeah, it's definitely, I think most, like you said, most authors write what they know, or write what they've seen, or write what they heard, and then try to figure out a way to embellish on that so that it's not necessarily a memoir.
So a lot of authors I've talked to, some it's taken 2 years. I've had an author that took 15 years to put a book together. How long did it take you to put the novel together?
Yeah, it took a while. I mean, it was a good 5 years of, trying to get this onto paper, make sense of it all. It's like anything else. It's a labor of love. It's a hard, challenging situation to put yourself to because you don't necessarily have all the time in the world to write every single day. Everybody's got a day job when you first begin.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to find time to get that to work. And the story, I wrote is complex. And so it wasn't easy to write. I started off in this very insane situation that happens in the beginning of the book. It's kind of current daytime with this Rick Price character and this, wildly incredible situation has happened to him. And the reader kind of goes like, wow, that's insane. I'm not so sure how that happened or what's going on. And then I kind of jump back into his life. So we go backwards from birth into sort of reality where he is today. And we're just skipping back and forth, skipping back and forth, skipping back and forth. So it's a bit complicated to write that way, but a bit exciting to do as well. So it took some time. So 5 years now, yeah, I'm working on book number 2, and I expect that to go a lot quicker.
Man, oh man, I'd say, one thing that I've also learned, every author I've spoken to is discipline. I would not be a good author. I wouldn't be able to sit down for hours and write. So discipline is probably the biggest, I don't know, competency or way of go about writing a book.
Yeah, it's definitely not for everybody, and it is a lot of discipline. But though for me, I've kind of taken maybe a strange approach to my writing than other people do. Like I do not write in silence at all. I mean, silence is just not my friend. So I don't sit down and shut the doors and clear my mind and do some meditating, get the thoughts out, and kind of set the scene of like, do not disturb. This guy is working on a masterpiece. No, I've got my music full blown on, and my room is, got post-its everywhere. It's kind of like a crime scene, and I'm in this chaos, and I'm able to then get into the character, get into the head, get into the scene. And so, while it does take a lot of discipline to do, I try to at least make the environment and the atmosphere conducive to wanting to write instead of saying, oh, I have to now shut myself from the world and and get into my brain. I kind of let it all out. So it's a little bit cathartic. It's a little bit cathartic as well.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I have to have music. I have to have a radio show, or I have to have a podcast. I have always things on the background, no matter what. I don't, for some reason, I can't be in silence. I have to be listening, or, just have that, have my mind going, listening to a song or listening to a podcast or something like that. But I can't do much in silence either. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, what it reminds me of? It's like, you're watching like an NFL game, right? Or an NBA game or any professional sports game. And, what are all the athletes doing before the game? They got their headphones on.
Yeah.
They're getting jacked up.
Yeah.
They're about to go into the arena. I'm thinking the same thing. I'm going to sit down and write it on this computer. I'm going to get jacked up.
Yeah. And music's a great way for inspiration. Some days you can have a bad day and then all of a sudden you hear that one song and it can switch your mood in a heartbeat. Does that do that for you? I ask that to every guest.
Yeah, 100% it does it to me, and that's why, again, each chapter is an ode to a great punk rock anthem that the song actually has a lot to do with the chapter itself, and that was a bit, cumbersome to do because you're writing this great chapter, and then you're kind of going back into time saying, well, what's that one song, that can kind of put the pieces together, and so, it's a very interesting process, and certainly music is a big part of my life and a big part of the book.
What was it like when you got that? I'm sure you got that box of all the first prints. What was that like when you got that? Was that awesome?
That's kind of like childbirth, right?
That's
Like, let
fast.
me
That's
open
cool.
this. Yeah, you open it up and you go like, I cannot believe I just gave birth to this. I
That's
mean, I'm not taking it away from the women who have childbirth. It's a lot more painful for you than for writing a book, but the excitement is pretty palpable. Yeah, it is. I remember I was like, I said to myself, okay, I'm not going to be one of those guys when that book comes that I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to start taking pictures of the book and the box and myself. And I'm not going to do that. I could be cooler than that. Well, that book came and that box opened, and I said to my wife, I said, take pictures.
yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. It's just the fruits of your labor, and it's the final result. But you're going to write some more in the series. I remember when I did my first podcast episode, I put it out there. It took me a while to get it to going, and then all of a sudden, I'm like, I can't believe 80 people listened to it. It was amazing. It was like people overseas and California and Montana. I was like, wow, this is like I can. The excitement was there for me too. So I know that it's quite a thing. So talk about some other 80s. I just thought of another one. How about the Ramones? Were you a big Ramones fan?
Huge Ramones fan. One of the first bands I ever saw. And again, I lived in New York. I lived mainly in Long Island. Those guys are from Queens, and yeah, they're in the book. I think a couple chapters got the Ramones in there. Even today, I mean, I think it wasn't it just. I don't. It's always that amazing situation when a band comes out and literally just about everything they write you love. It's like they had a formula, they got it right, they did it their way, and it worked. And today it still holds up incredibly true. And it's not the most complex song arrangements out there. And I think that's what makes it so accessible to people. But yeah, I think if you were to ask them today if it was easy for them to write those songs, I wonder what they would say. I wonder if they would be the same thing as we are when we write books and be like, it took a little while,
Yeah.
or maybe the songs are so simple. Maybe they're like, hey, we just sat down and banged it out, you know. But the Ramones are, yeah, huge influence, amazing band, and yeah, I mean, I think they've just been a catalyst of so many other bands like Green Day and so forth that has looked at the Ramones for inspiration.
One thing I like to see on TV is like you'll see commercials on TV and it's all about the 70s, 80s, and 90s song. And it's nostalgia. And the Ramones are on one of them for a shot, getting a shot so you don't get COVID or something. And they
Yeah,
have
it's
all
like, hey, oh,
these.
hey, oh, let's go.
Yeah, yeah. And it's all these folks, older folks, I'll be kind,
Yeah.
moving and getting going, and they're having fun. And every time I see that commercial, and after I heard that commercial a couple weeks ago, I started playing some Ramones songs, and it's like, man, man, they were killer. They're just fast paced songs.
Fast-paced songs. Everything had a good rhythm and a beat to it. It was fast-paced, but it was sing-along and repetitive. And I think
Yeah,
it's just those earworms. They just get stuck in your head. That's quite amazing for a band to be able to do that
yeah,
and
boy,
consistently do that.
yeah. That is so cool. I just love when you see that on TV. People love nostalgia. So when you see that, it just brings back great memories. So talk about, you know, we talked about the trifecta about winning the awards. What's next on the one you're working on in the series? Are you finding that easier or are you finding it a little bit more difficult?
It's it's a bit. It's still the same tedious process of trying to get it going, but I'm working on the second book. The first book was Thank God for the Sinners, as we're promoting today. The second book is going to be Thank God for the Drugs. It's always will be Thank God for something that that would be kind of controversial. And again, this Rick Price character, with this one, he was sort of spends his time overseas. in China and Southeast Asia, and most of the story takes place there, and then back to his childhood in New York. This one is going to take place completely in the United States. So Rick gets transferred from overseas to the United States, gets himself into similar trouble, similar situations, and this one's in the U.S., and then the next one will probably be somewhere else. And it's kind of it's fun to do that. It's fun to have a character that has so much dimension to him and then put him into these uncanny scenarios all over the world. So I'm really trying to give the reader, a real voyage with this character. And to explore places and things that maybe they haven't seen or haven't heard about and kind of put them into a reality that is a bit different than what they would do every single day.
Over the years, there have been some cases of double agents getting caught here in the United States or
Mhm.
overseas. And can you imagine the stress or the just looking over your shoulder for these folks? Did you draw anything from any of those cases? I don't remember names off the top of my head, but I remember some people getting caught and they're as working as double agents. That must be stressful as heck.
Yeah, I didn't take, that was always went on my mind. So yes, I mean, I've always said to myself, okay, if you have a character who's working overseas, kind of like I did, and something incredible goes wrong, something, incredibly bad has happened to this character. Like what does this character do? How do you get out of that kind of trouble? How do you proclaim your innocence in a country like China where there is no justice?
Hmm.
What do you do? And then if you have to lean upon your business associates that are over there, and those business associates are corrupt as well, and then you're also, kind of exploiting some of these corruption schemes for the governments that are involved in all this, you're constantly looking over your shoulder. You're kind of put into a situation where you don't know how to win and you don't know what goes on. And then if your background has been riddled with, mental trauma,
Hmm.
uh, it gets even more complicated.
Wow.
Um, and so, yeah, I wanted to put all that on the table, but really as kind of reference to, look, yes, this guy's got unbelievable stress more than anybody, possibly has. It's completely fictionalized, but at the same time, I wanted people to recognize that, look, life is stressful. We do go by it, and we do have times of uncertainty and times where it feels like you don't have anybody to rely upon, and you have deep, dark secrets inside that are, clouding your judgment every day. And it's sort of, how do we get through it? And then more importantly, like, how did that happen? Are you wired at birth to, have, this excess trauma in your life? This trauma happened from either the abuse that you go through. What comes first? Is it trauma at birth? Is it the trauma that happens to you when you're younger? And then how do you deal with that as you go along your life? And then if your life gets complicated, like this character's does, extremely complicated, how do you fall back on what you know or what you learned or some of those feelings that you have to sort of help save you when nobody else can? And so it's complicated, but I think that most people, if they take it grain by grain, salt by salt, digest it into small chunks, they can see that I'm making this big, analysis of life in
Yeah.
this one situation.
You had mentioned China. There are a lot of countries in this world where you're guilty even before any trial, or you're guilty even if you have a trial, you're still guilty. We have a gift here in the United States is that you have a chance to go to court and get exonerated. That must be terrifying if you're in another country.
That's the whole point. Not that that has happened to me in my life, but certainly I've been in uncompromising situations where I thought to myself, geez, if this goes south, what do I do? Who do I call? You know,
Yeah.
like, how do I get out of this? And back in maybe China today, still communist, but a bit different than it was back in the mid 90s and the early 2000s, where it was like the wild, wild west. It was like anything goes.
Really?
Yeah. So and again, that time period in China, just like punk rock in the 70s and 80s, that particular snapshot of time, that will never happen again. The country has changed dramatically, as we all know. It's now a superpower. When I was there, it was a third world country. And I really wanted to also encapsulate that particular time period because it was so interesting and it's so radically different than the China today. So that was part of the book too. It's a little bit historical that way.
Wow, that is when you think about it, about China or just any country like that, that it must be scary to be in a country like that where that happens. Man, that just boggles the mind. We have it pretty good here with the system we have. We may knock some stuff, but this system we have is you got a shot to exonerate yourself if you're innocent. That's just it boggles the mind.
Yeah, and that's the truth. I mean, you come back to the U.S. after working in places like that, and you become very thankful for where you are and where you live. And even before you get to the U.S., if you've been working in China like I did back in those days, you just have to cross the border over into Hong Kong at that time, and you just sit down and kiss the ground. Say, thank God I'm here. I can get a shower and something decent to eat, and people speaking English, and I'm on my way home.
You mentioned China also. They were building cities where nobody lived, huge cities where nobody was living in them. And I don't know what happened to those cities, but you see these things on social media, these videos of like, skyscrapers among skyscrapers, and nobody's living in these empty cities.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's there's a lot of that. I think when a country gets that wealthy that quick, and gets that powerful, there's no playbook for them to go by, and so they just keep going as it's happening. And so yeah, there's a lot to be said about that. Certainly, yeah, I've been in those cities and in those buildings, and some of them are never even fully built.
Hmm.
But it's just it's amazing, amazing thing to see. And then also, now we have an experience of the rest of Southeast Asia trying to catch up to China. You have the similar things going on in Vietnam and even into Indonesia, even smaller countries like Cambodia. And everybody is now feeling the ripple effects of what goes on in China. And it's an interesting time period for Asia.
Talk about the importance of music as therapy as well. As someone's reading the book, they can also download the songs with the playlist. Talk about that because I have not seen that in a book or any type where you can actually read and have the music go along with it. That's pretty. I guess I can't even put the word to it. That's
Yeah,
can't even
I
put a
took it
word
to
to
another
it.
level.
Yeah, there you go. There you
I took
go.
it to another level. It's I think that goes back to my filmmaking days, to be honest with you. When you write screenplays and then you put them onto film, it's more than just the film and the acting and what's, on that piece of film itself, but there's, the whole musical background to it, whether it's, background music or it's, theme songs. It becomes this all-in-one comprehensive, escapism, and creative escapism. And I just wanted to give the book a different dimensionality. I wanted people to be like, okay, I get this character. I understand what's going on. It's pretty frenetic, and here's the music, and that's why it's frenetic. And then you kind of go, oh, I get it now. There's a theme here, and so yeah, it just adds a different dimension and a different reality to what I've done, and and I will continue to do that because I think it's gotten a lot of people really love that about the book, and I'm sure it's going to get harder and harder for me to get those songs onto the book, but it will be something that I'll continue to do.
Yeah, talk about your film career. You spoke about it earlier. Talk about your film career. That's I always like talking to filmmakers. What was that like working in the film industry?
Yeah, it was for me. It was great. Went to De Niro's New York Film Academy back in the early '90s.
Wow.
Met a film partner there from Italy, and the one thing we had in common was we both read The Odyssey. It was just one of we didn't have much else in common, but we both knew this incredible story. And we said to ourselves, this is early '90s. Seattle was really coming onto the scene with some incredible music. Nirvana, everything was breaking in Seattle. The whole grunge thing
Oh
was happening.
yeah.
And we said to ourselves, let's get over to Seattle. Let's write a movie that's got some historical situation in it, but let's make all the characters sort of the everyday people that are going on in Seattle. And Seattle at that time was extremely colorful. You had all walks of life. Everybody was an artist. Everybody was doing their own thing. It was the most creative, like, situation happening in the United States at that point. And we went over there and we hired every musician, stripper, drug dealer, band promoter, and we retold the Odyssey, making these particular people all the gods and goddesses that were in the Odyssey. So you're taking these everyday sort of dysfunctional creative lives and saying to them, you know what? You're gonna be this god. You're gonna be this goddess, and we're gonna tell this story. And it's a great story of a drug dealer who's, got one last deal to do before he can get out with his beautiful wife, and she gets abducted, and he can't get home to save her because he keeps getting interfered with all these gods and goddesses that he sees on the streets that are trying to keep him back from saving his
Mm.
wife, just like the story of the Odyssey itself. But we did it at a time period also where independent filmmaking was becoming a thing. You could raise a very small amount of money, hire people for nothing, feed them pizza and cigarettes and beer, and go out there and steal scenes and put stuff together. And there was a real creative ethos for that back at that time period. And again, that's the rest of the common theme around this particular interview is that was a period of time that will never happen again. And I really wanted to capture that as well. Early 90s Seattle, every day, fantastic story, original people, let's capture this in a time capsule and make something that was exciting and risque and not completely polished because we really had no money to do it in. But the ethos of independent spirit filmmaking, very similar to independent music and punk rock music, was do it yourself. Go out there and do it. Don't let anybody tell you no. Don't let anybody say you can't do it. Don't let your own brain tell yourself you
Mhm.
can't do it. Set your mind to it. Gather around the right people around you, and try to make gold out of it. And that was a great period of time.
Can you find the movie on any social on streaming services?
You can find it on YouTube, yeah. And if you go to my website, ericmagan.com, there's a link. It's called Toast with the Gods. That was the name of the movie. There's a link on my website that will take you right to the full blown movie. You can see the trailer, you can see the movie, and yeah, it was just an incredible time period. A lot of great learning, and I think a lot of great influence to writing this book later on. As far as trying to get all the dimensionality into the book, and to do it your way. That's the common theme.
I love talking independent filmmakers that I've had on my podcast. It's fascinating just starting from scratch and getting that movie out. It's quite remarkable when the final product is there. You mentioned early 90s, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, and Pearl Jam, all from Seattle, and pretty much put heavy metal to the side. And grunge is, I think grunge is a compliment. I think it's the perfect word for that music. It's great music, but grunge, it's awesome.
Yeah, exactly right. And it has so many parallels to the punk rock movement that I was in myself, except as far as kind of not being corporate and doing your own thing, having your own sound, having your own vision, your own stage presence, singing about things that matter to you. So yeah, it was, and again, yeah, there was that heavy metal side to it too. But I think it's just all about the independent side of things. It was a bunch of people doing things their way, working in small clubs with a small genre of people that then turn, to a much larger genre of people. And I think it took, back then, I think it took everybody by surprise. I don't
Oh
think
yeah.
it took the record industry by surprise. It took everybody by surprise. It took MTV by surprise. I mean, all of a sudden it was like, what is this?
Yeah.
But like the Ramones, Nirvana especially, and even some of those other bands, they had songs that were catchy. They just stuck with you, and you got it, and it wasn't offensive. But if anything, you were like, "Oh, cool, yeah, I felt that. Oh yeah, I resonate with that. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I get that." And then the words just kind of popped into your head, and so they did It was a really interesting time period, and I love how music just kind of reinvents itself all the time and new genres keep breaking out, new spin-offs keep breaking out. I think that's part of the beauty behind music.
I love all the Seattle bands, but I have a special especially like in Stone Temple Pilots. I thought a lot of
Yeah.
their music, early music, was just riveting as Nirvana. And I've always said their Nirvana Unplugged album is the greatest Unplugged on MTV, bar none. It's the greatest one, I think, in my opinion.
My too. I agree with you. It was sensational. And it was, yeah, that stripped down raw version of emotion is what it was. It was just so emotional. Really fantastic.
Yeah, he just sits there, Kurt Cobain just sitting on that stool there, just singing.
Mm.
And my favorite song out of that is Lake of Fire. I love
Oh,
that when they did it with the Meat Puppets. And it just, the
brilliant.
angles, it was really awesome. I get goosebumps every time I see that video, just the way they did it. It was almost awesome.
Yes, brilliant.
Yeah, so you can get your Thank God for the Sinners at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple Books, Kindle, or wherever you get your books here in the United States or around the world. This is a book that you should get. Eric Magun has been my guest, and his website is www.ericmagun.com. You can find out where to get the book there on the website. It's won 3 awards now. I said 2, but he just broke some news here. It got a 3rd award. So he's got the hat trick, trifecta. And Eric, I want to thank you very much for coming on. And maybe when you get that second novel, I'd like to have you back on.
Would love to do that. And I really appreciate the time today. Thank you so much.